Super Mario 64? Nah. Super Mario 128. Super Mario, the Nintendo equivalent of Mickey Mouse, or if you're German, David Hasselhoff. He is that iconic. Yes, that red-capped, mustachioed plumber has managed to burrow his way into the hearts and minds of gamers worldwide, becoming arguably the single most iconic figure in the entire history of video games. Recently on this channel, we've already discussed Super Mario 64, a title that not only redefined the very essence of 3D platforming, but also inspired every other game in the genre to scramble and keep up. So, as you'd expect, after such a seismic leap in gaming innovation, fans immediately began to pine for a sequel. Shortly after the release of the hit game, Shigeru Miyamoto began teasing a direct follow-up to the now classic game, one that originated as a proposed 64DD project and is often referred to in hushed, reverent tones as Mario 64 2. We've already covered that slice of conceptual foreplay in a previous video, the game that may have morphed into Mario 64 DS depending on who you ask. However, today we're delving into something far more peculiar, a project that had been floating around to Nintendo for years, part tech demo, part ghost story, and for a time was treated like a serious working title. I am Lady Decade. Hit that subscribe button because this is the weird story of the enigmatic Super Mario 128. High-end 3D platformers are having a bit of a renaissance at the moment. Donkey Kong Bonanza looks to be one of the most promising titles in the whole Switch 2 library. Still, while games from this genre might not be as common as they once were, that doesn't mean there aren't some good ones that you might have missed that are worth playing from time to time, such as A Hat in Time, for example, which, using my link, you can get for an incredible 57% cheaper than on Steam. In fact, Mario 64's influence can be felt everywhere, platformers or not. Get huge discounts of up to 90% off of thousands of indie, AAA, retro and modern titles by using my affiliate links in the pinned comment. I hope you get some great deals and enjoy the rest of this video. The term Super Mario 128 was first mentioned back in 1997, a time when Super Mario 64 was still the fresh new face of 3D platforming and a bona fide system seller for the Nintendo 64. Despite the fact that players were still marvelling at their first triple jump through Peach's castle courtyard, Nintendo's beloved mad scientist Shigeru Miyamoto was already waxing lyrical about a potential follow-up. At industry events like E3 that year, Miyamoto hinted at a sequel, one that would showcase capabilities of the ill-fated Nintendo 64 disk drive. This elusive project was said to include features such as two-player functionality with both Mario and Luigi, and yes, the long-awaited ability to ride Yoshi through a proper 3D space. Talk about dream wishlist territory. At the time, Miyamoto primarily referred to the game as Super Mario 64 2, but every now and then he'd slip in the term Super Mario 128. It was a curious little label, one that started off as more of an in-joke than a serious code name. You see, back then, slapping 64 onto a title was all the rage, a not-so-subtle way of flaunting the system's 64-bit capabilities, so cheekily doubling it to 128? Well, it was just a bit of fun, a bit of hype, a bit of Miyamoto just being Miyamoto. But while Super Mario 128 may have begun life as a throwaway quip, this number, this idea, would soon start to take on a life of its very own. Fast forward to May 1999 and Nintendo would officially unveil Project Dolphin, the code name for their next major console, intended to succeed the Nintendo 64 and propel the company into the next generation of gaming hardware. This new machine was being engineered in collaboration with a team known as ArtX, a bunch of Silicon Graphics veterans who knew a thing or two about graphics hardware. Before long, ArtX would be gobbled up by ATI, a name that should ring a bell with anyone who's ever tinkered inside a PC. In early 2000, ATI proudly declared itself a major supplier to the game console market via Nintendo, going on to call the Dolphin King of the Hill in terms of graphics and video performance, and even throwing around the phrase 128-bit architecture. Now, whether or not this was technically true is up for debate. Let's just say the maths were more creative than concrete. But the marketing team liked how it sounded, and frankly, so did the fans. What was undeniable, however, was that this new system would be far more powerful than its predecessor, and by the time August the 25th of the year 2000 rolled around and Space World opened its doors, the world would finally be introduced to the console's official name, the Nintendo GameCube. At this event, a curious little tech demo was unveiled, directed by none other than Yoshiaki Koizumi, the assistant director of Super Mario 64 and a man who knew how to capture attention. Those in attendance were floored when, clear as day, the words Mario 128 flashed up on the screen. It was no longer just a rumour, it wasn't a cheeky nickname, it was real. Damn real. The demo kicked off in a bizarre fashion, with a giant 2D Mario sprawled across the screen, but a closer look revealed something peculiar. This oversized plumber was, in fact, constructed out of 128 individual square tiles. Then, in a sudden burst of 3D wizardry, a fully rendered Mario popped out from beneath one of the tiles and began hurling boxes around like a caffeinated warehouse worker. And lo and behold, each tossed tile unveiled another Mario beneath it. As this chaotic Mario multiplication continued, a counter ticked upward, eventually revealing all 128 Marios jostling around on screen. Each one animated, each one independent, each one mocking the very notion of hardware limitations. It was equal parts mesmerizing and ridiculous. But the madness didn't end there. The terrain itself began to twist and morph underfoot, the ground contorting like a flying saucer before transforming into what can only be described as a low-poly pepperoni pizza. These psychedelic surface shifts weren't just for show. They were designed to demonstrate the GameCube's physics capabilities and its ability to manipulate complex geometry in real time. The message was crystal clear. This new console wasn't just more powerful than the N64, it was in a completely different league. Journalists were sent into a frenzy. NGC Magazine, better known to us old schoolers as N64 Magazine, declared Super Mario 128 one of the most anticipated titles of 2001, despite the fact that no actual game had been announced. They speculated that Nintendo were being cautious, and rightly so. After all, when Super Mario 64 was first shown off years earlier, rival developers wasted no time ripping off its pioneering camera system, so if Nintendo were keeping Mario 128 close to their chest, who could blame them? But what was announced next differed greatly from what we had seen previously. At the following year's Space World event in 2001, Nintendo lifted the lid on their next big 3D Mario adventure, Super Mario Sunshine. And who should be directing this tropical outing? None other than Yoshiaki Koizumi, the man who'd helmed the now legendary Mario 128 tech demo. By this point, Koizumi was on a bit of a hot streak, having just followed up his success with The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The stars were aligning. Naturally, many assumed that Sunshine was the next logical step from the demo, that this was the full game Mario 128 had been leading into, but was it? Well, no, not even close. While Sunshine certainly built upon the 3D platforming foundations laid by Mario 64, it didn't bear much resemblance to the chaotic swarm of physics-driven Marios seen in the 128 showcase. In fact, the connection was tenuous at best. But the Mario 128 story was far from over yet. In December 2002, fresh hope emerged in an unexpected place. Japan's weekly Playboy magazine. In an interview, Shigeru Miyamoto confirmed that a game bearing the name Mario 128 was indeed in development. He boldly claimed, "I believe that with this game, you'll be able to feel the newness that was missing from Mario Sunshine." That's right, even Nintendo's own legendary game designer seemed to admit that Sunshine wasn't quite the revolutionary leap forward fans had been expecting. He also hinted that Mario 128 would be more of a spiritual continuation of Mario 64 than Sunshine ever was. But come E3 2003, Still, no Mario 128. Its absence led to rampant speculation. Was Nintendo scared of having their new ideas ripped off again? Just like what happened post Mario 64? Whatever the reason, fans were left waiting, yet Miyamoto continued to insist that development was still ongoing. Later in 2003, Koizumi officially joined Nintendo's newly formed EAD Tokyo studio. And years later, in an interview for Nintendo.com, he'd look back on that fateful Space World showing and admit something rather revealing. Even after the event, he couldn't stop thinking about how to turn the concepts from the demo into something real. Something playable, something that might actually be worth slapping a price tag on. But despite all of that creative energy, there was one massive obstacle in his way: physics. No, not the school subject, although that was a pain for me. We're talking about literal technical gravity-based limitations. You see, the floating platform in the demo, the one shaped like a flying saucer, had sparked an idea. Koizumi envisioned a game where Mario could explore fully spherical environments, walking around planets and platforms with their own gravity. A wildly ambitious concept, but one that seemed impossible, bearing in mind the hardware and the tools available at the time. Still, Koizumi wasn't ready to give up. After finishing work on Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, he began laying the groundwork for his next project, a spiritual successor not to Jungle Beat, but to his Mario 128 prototype. Miyamoto, never one to shy away from pushing his protégés to the brink, challenged him to go even further. Koizumi, now armed with a team of devs he'd come to trust, believed the time had come to revisit his impossible dream, to finally take that concept of spherical platforming and make it a reality. But was this Super Mario 128? Well, it was still too early to tell. By the time E3 2004 came and went, Super Mario 128 remained conspicuously absent, once again leaving fans to stew in their own speculation. But that didn't mean the game was dead, far from it. In yet another interview, Shigeru Miyamoto popped up to insist that development was still underway, though in typically cryptic Miyamoto fashion. Some journalists speculated that Nintendo had intentionally held the project back that year so as not to overshadow the grand unveiling of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, a cinematic wolf-infused reimagining of the franchise that certainly hogged the spotlight. And then came the infamous quote. When asked about Mario 128, Miyamoto offered the following now legendary line: "It's moving along secretly, like a submarine under the water." When developing, we often look at the different hardware and run different experiments on it and try out different ideas. There have been a number of different experiment ideas that we have been running on the GameCube. There are some that we have run on DS, and there are other ideas too. At this point, I just don't know if we will see that game on one system or another. It is still hard for me to make that decision. I am the only director on that game right now. I have the programmers making different experiments, and when I see the results, we will make the final decision. In other words, something was definitely cooking, but no one could quite agree on what it was. What we did know for sure, though, was that something was definitely brewing. Then came GDC 2005, and Nintendo of America's charismatic frontman Reggie Fils-Aimé confidently predicted that Super Mario 128 would finally make an appearance at that year's E3, though likely in the form of a non-interactive video. But as history would swiftly demonstrate, nope, still no sign of it. Not a clip, not a screenshot, not a whisper. Shortly after the disappointment of the event, Miyamoto once again emerged from the shadows to confirm that Mario 128 was still alive, just no longer destined for the GameCube. Whatever this mysterious project was, it had officially jumped ship. Later that same year, Nintendo began teasing its next-generation console under the codename The Revolution, a name that sounded more like a military coup than a games console. But what would soon become known as the Nintendo Wii was anything but conventional. With its motion sensing controls and a philosophy that aimed to disrupt traditional gameplay entirely, Nintendo's direction was finally beginning to make sense, even if the industry at large was still scratching its head. As the Revolution hype train left the station, Shifty Shigeru kept drip-feeding tiny nuggets of Mario information. In a Japanese radio interview, he teased that the next Mario title would introduce a brand new character to stand beside our favourite mustachioed plumber. And crucially, he made it clear this game would not be called Super Mario 128. And then, at long last, the curtain lifted. Enter Super Mario Galaxy, a game conceptually designed by Miyamoto and once again directed by Yoshiaki Koizumi. This interstellar adventure took Mario far beyond the Mushroom Kingdom, hurtling him across the cosmos in pursuit of power stars on spherical planets of all shapes and sizes. The impossible dream of spherical platforming, first conceived years earlier in that strange little demo, had finally been realised. Galaxy was more than just a new Mario game, it was the revolutionary leap that fans have been waiting for since Super Mario 64. A critical darling, a commercial smash, and proof that Nintendo, when it wanted to, could still deliver innovation wrapped up in a fat plumber's dungarees. During a keynote speech at GDC 2007, the very same year that Super Mario Galaxy was due to launch, Shigeru Miyamoto would resurrect the old spectre of Super Mario 128 one final time. Miyamoto clarified once and for all that Super Mario 128 had never actually been a full game. It was, in his words, a tech demo. A flashy experimental showcase designed to showcase the GameCube's capabilities and nothing more. He acknowledged that, yes, elements from that demo, particularly the concepts of gravity and physics, had found their way into Galaxy. But then, in true Shifty Shigeru fashion, he dropped a bombshell. Super Mario 128 is actually a game called Pikmin. Because, of course it is. You see, at their core, Pikmin and the Mario 128 demo do share a very similar design philosophy, one focused on the animation, autonomy, and interaction of large numbers of individual characters. In Pikmin, you control Captain Olimar, a spacefaring botanist stranded on an alien world who commands an army of tiny plant creatures. These Pikmin work in unison to carry broken parts, fend off hostile wildlife, and rebuild Olimar's ship so that he can get the hell out of Dodge. Much like the swarm of Marios in the demo, the genius of Pikmin lies in managing a crowd of AI-driven entities with seamless animation and responsive behaviour. It was less about one hero on an adventure and more about guiding an ecosystem, and in that sense, it really was the spiritual successor to Super Mario 128. So, it seems that from all of this, that a tech demo about 128 Marios reincarnated as a gardening simulator in space. Honestly, hats off. That's a top-shelf troll move, if ever there was one. When you line up Pikmin and the Mario 128 demo side by side, the parallels are undeniable. The swarm-based movement, the focus on character physics, the micro-level strategy, it's all there, just minus the moustaches. But let's be honest, Super Mario 128's fingerprints can be found far beyond Olimar's garden-themed escapades. It's said that the physics tech pioneered in the demo would go on to influence none other than Metroid Prime, helping bring Samus's world to life with environmental interaction and subtle object dynamics that pushed the GameCube harder than most. And the legacy didn't stop at that influence. Nintendo went ahead and left a cheeky little Easter egg for fans who were paying attention. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, the GameCube's biggest selling title, there's an event match literally named Super Mario 128, where you're tasked with taking down 128 tiny Marios all at once. A chaotic, button-mashing tribute to a game that never truly existed but somehow influenced everything. So if Mario 128 helped shape Galaxy, gave birth to Pikmin, lent its tech to Metroid Prime, and even made a cameo in Smash Bros., then this so-called non-game may have had more impact on Nintendo's 6th generation output than half the titles that actually saw a release. Its moment in history firmly secured. Don't forget that although 3D platformers are not as common as they once were, that doesn't mean we don't get good ones that you might have missed that are definitely worth playing, such as A Hat in Time, which, using my link, you can get for a brilliant 57% cheaper than on Steam. Get huge discounts of up to 90% off of thousands of indie, AAA, retro and modern titles by using my affiliate links in the pinned comment. I hope that you find some great deals. But if you'd like to support my channel in a more personal way, you can access my behind-the-scenes cosplay library and more over on Patreon.